There you go.
That was Jason's first thing he did for 3 months ago. Okay, so.
Welcome to the select board meeting for tonight. Hi. Oh, there you go. It's 5:30, so let's get going. Untitled Ward, Bill Kennedy, fellow select board member. We have Nicole McStay, town administrator, and Danica Malone, our town planner here. The select board has minutes to approve, and then I'm going to hand the meeting right over to Rick Lesser, chair of the budget committee.
Let's have the Helen Brown.
And another item of business, that's right, I forgot about that, but I did read the email about that. Right. So we are on air, and this meeting will be archived for future viewing. So I would make a motion that we do approve those budget committee joint select board meetings for the select board from the past 2 sessions. Yeah, I don't remember the dates.
I guess I second that one.
All those in favor? Aye. Okay, and then I received an email from Chief Walker regarding some funds, and John? Yep. Regarding 2 items to come from the Helen Brown Fund, right?
Yeah, I'm up right now.
Yeah. Just a quick explanation.
Okay, so the first one's a narcotics suit.
Correct.
So, a little bit of background on Helen Brown Trust, that apparently back in...
Forever ago?
Way back.
Way back.
Put in about $100,000 into a trust fund, of which, proceeds from which are to benefit the fire and ambulance services.
Yeah, there's some separate partitions, so there's the fire department, there's the ambulance, town of Hancock. Fire department also is part of that. They have their own fund through her and some others. And to Bill's point, the important part is it is an interest-only fund. So the fund is designed to maintain principal. So her intent was to always have that principal continuing to grow, and it grows until we use it. A few things we've used it for recently. Those of you who remember back in 2016, we did some renovations to the station. That was done through Helen Brown money. We added mini splits to provide air conditioning and did some other improvements, put the bunk rooms in. We've also used it to buy, some sort of small ancillary equipment for it. This is one of the first times that we're really looking to use it to buy something that is important to the operation, and John can explain a little more about the safes and the need for those right now.
So all of our paramedic level ambulances require paramedic level medication to include controlled substances, narcotics, for pain meds, benzodiazepines for seizures, stuff like that. There are some fairly there's a mix of opinions on sometimes on how those things should be stored. Ours, since I've been here, is the most robust way to do it. Our safes do audit logs and require an RFID card and a PIN code to get into. But we were notified a little over a year ago now that those safes have definitively reached their end of life. If they start to fail, then there's nothing that we're able to do. So at this point, the only real way forward is to start replacing them. In looking through a bunch of different options as far as manufacturers, there are very few out there that will do the type of 2-factor authentication that we still have right now. A lot of them rely on either a single-digit PIN code that doesn't necessarily link to a database. You just issue somebody a code and that's how they get in and stuff like that. So in looking at it, these, while they may not be the cheapest, they are the most secure. And so that's why we're looking to replace them. The current ones are definitely starting to show their age a little bit, and before we have an issue regarding missing controlled substances that nobody wants to deal with.
Or not being able to access them when the patient needs them. It works both ways.
Yep. Yeah, that's the worst part.
That's kind of why I wanted to put this forward through, and just due to the cost, it kind of falls in between something that's not particularly great for the CIP plan, but it's also a little much for the operating budget too, so.
Well, I think this is an appropriate expense out of that particular account.
Sure. So it requires a subscription. Does everybody have a silver barrel every step of our lives?
Unfortunately, it really is looking like that's the way it goes these days.
It's just,
It's infuriating.
I'm not saying this is not super important. I mean, that stuff has to be secure. I'm just making the ridiculousness of a subscription to get into a safe.
Unfortunately, they've started using encrypted cloud-based software, and that's where that subscription fee goes.
Which is as safe as nothing, really, because everybody's hacking encrypted information. Okay, any question? Anybody else have any questions about this?
Well, ostensibly, it also creates a recording of who's accessing those safes when, which is
Good.
good.
Sure.
Yeah, for people who may not remember, I think Nicole was around just prior to my arrival. In fact, the dust hadn't even settled. We had an issue with the diversion of narcotics here. And when it was discovered, the ability to have that audit logging and that tracking significantly helped the investigatory process and connecting the dots and resolving everything in a timely fashion. And I think since then, I feel it's safe saying that Nicole would not support anything that didn't provide us with that from an administrative and legal standpoint based on that prior event. That was in 13.
Not that there's any question that this board and budget committee would
Right.
support
Oh, yeah, no,
this,
right.
you
But I'm
know,
just saying that
certainly
for
would.
further to further validate your point, I mean, once bitten, twice shy.
Absolutely. I think these are vital. No question about it.
I'm just curious what the principal is on that fund. Do you know what the principal is? You said
Well, the original principal was 100,000. I don't know what the current principal is.
I don't have it right now. Do you have it? I left it on my desk. It's not really material.
No. And then there is also a second request.
Are we just making one motion, one vote for both?
Well, I have some questions about the ice simulator, is that what it's called?
I simulate.
What is it simulating? Again, I went onto their site and did a little bit of research, but
Sure. So basically, this allows us one of the challenges to back up just a touch, one of the challenges with trying to do any kind of high fidelity medical simulation is being able to adjust things like vital signs in real time as people are asking questions, they're simulating procedures, and being able to turn around and make adjustments on the fly in response to the chosen treatment pathways and stuff like that. So this is what that starts to allow us to do. It essentially takes the form of our cardiac monitor and will allow us to build pre-programmed scenarios for heart attacks, cardiac arrests, pretty much anything under the sun that we could think of and try to encounter. And as you start to run through that scenario, it allows you to do things like have passing criteria, and if they don't do a certain thing in a certain time frame, they don't pass the scenario. But as that clock is ticking, you get 2, 3, 4 minutes into your scenario, now you'll repeat your vital signs automatically, and those vital signs will change. You're not relying on a human verbalizing that your blood pressure is now 80 over 50 instead of 100 over 90, whatever it happens to be.
I noticed they have a demo available. Have you had your hands on this at all?
I have not directly had my hands on it. I've worked with one of the reps to work through how the software works and things of that nature. But I have seen it through other of our employees who have had it in other places. So that's kind of how that came
So you
about.
have personal experience with it?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
Are these funds managed by the trustees of the trust?
Yes.
So they just need, that voters are not affected in any way by the decision, and the select board has to approve, is that
Correct. Select board has to approve it, and then the minutes with that vote of approval are forwarded on to the trustees of the trust fund.
Thank you.
It's not a budget committee.
Correct. No, this is just a vote of the board.
Any other questions?
Do you still want the balances?
Sure.
The Helen Brown Fund to support ambulance is $532,642. Helen Brown to support fire department is $653,819.
That's the principal balance, correct?
Yes.
That's the total balance?
That's the total balance that
Total
includes the outstanding.
What's just the principal?
Depends who you're talking.
So, I'm sorry, Lily, if the original trust was 100,000 and that's the principal, then all the rest is expendable?
Not exactly.
So the spendable portion of the Helen Brown Disport ambulance is $31,762.71. And the support fire is $132,135.25.
I think the original cash was 100,000, but then there was also a state that was liquidated, 1/10 of which went into each of these funds. So there was more than just the initial cash.
Yes, there was more than $500,000 that went to both to initiate these funds.
So that's why it would generate enough interest to then
Correct.
accrue. So they're
Yeah.
fair. Any other questions?
Are there any other stipulations on that? Like, do you use it to buy furniture for the firehouse?
I'd have to look at the
You'd have to
instruments
look at
again.
the,
Yeah.
Well, I read that,
Yeah,
right?
you
Word
just-
had explicit language in that regard, as long as it benefited the fire and ambulance services.
And that is going to be part, to further your discussion, that is going to be part of what we're looking at as one of the things, particularly for things that provide more, direct benefit to the firefighters, weight equipment possibly, kitchen equipment, things like that, that are integral to the operation of the building, but are more appropriate for something like a trust fund or a gift account, if you will, as opposed to taxpayer money.
Excellent. Any more questions? These are good. Keep them coming. All right, I'd make a motion that we approve these two expenditures, requests for expenditures from the Helen Brown Fund.
So $11,085 for the iSimulate and
$12,633.
$12,633 for the narcotic safe. Yep.
I second.
All those in favor?
It's just a-
All right, great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, with that, I can hand it over to Rick Lesser, Chair of the Budget.
Let's talk about community college.
After that.
I sit on the Community Power Committee. They set rates through the state. Community Power, CPCNH. And these are our package for the town of Peterborough. The local option is the default, and it includes what's known as an adder, which is monies that are collected into a discretionary expenditure fund that's being held currently by CPCNH. But anyway, as we go up the list, I'll give you the actual numbers. They didn't include it. But it turns out this year, we're actually going to change the rates as of March. So the February rates are 8.9 cents per kilowatt hour for the Granite Basic. The Granite Plus is 9.6 cents per kilowatt hour. The Clean 50 is 10.3 cents, and the Clean 100 is 12.3 cents. Clean 100 means it's all sourced from renewables. And it's built on that. As of March, they're going to change the rates so that Granite Basic will be at 9.7 cents per kilowatt hour, going up by almost a cent. Granite Plus will be 10.4, Clean 50 11.1, and Clean 100 13.1 cents. So those of us who are opted in to CPCNH rates for our electricity, that's what you're going to get.
What were the rates increases like right across the board? You mentioned the first one?
Yeah.
They're all the same.
All across.
And do users have an option to change their position if rates come through?
Yes, you can opt out at any time, at which point you'll be defaulted to Eversource's rates, which I believe are a little bit higher than this. I don't have them out in front of me. And you can also opt out your current rate and drop down. Let's say you're in Clean 50, you can opt out and drop down to Granite Basic if you want a better rate. just wanted to let people know about that.
Does the board want to consider changing the town's currently opt-in to claim 100? Did you want to look at opting to a different level, or do you want to just leave it there for now?
I would say leave it there, leave it until we have the full three of us.
Well, I wasn't suggesting for tonight, just didn't know if you wanted to be an item for an upcoming agenda.
Ready to go?
All right. Thanks, Tyler. So our budget committee, I see Don Barker's in the back there, Dave Odlin, Tony Pascal, and then I've got Al Lenos, Mary Clark, Dick Reynolds, Carl Mazzino, and Leslie Lewis. We've got a full board here tonight. So we have to approve our minutes, I believe, our portion of the minutes. There was like 2 weeks. Did anybody have any comments about the minutes before we go ahead and decide? Mary?
Just a minor edit that I pointed out to Danica. The header for February 28th actually said February 21st. Otherwise, they look terrific.
I don't know how you do it.
Here's a practice.
February 28th.
January 28th. I misspoke. January 28th.
That's it, boy, jump into the future.
Any other comments? Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes for the last 2 weeks?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. To approve. Just before we get into Chief's presentations, I think next week we're probably not going to be meeting, correct? That's our snow date, February 11th?
That is correct.
So
Because we
then-
don't have a scheduled meeting for next week.
So then
None of us?
None of us.
So then we'll see everybody back here on February 18th. I guess we're ready to go then.
Yay. All right. For those of you that may have trouble with the screen, I do have some copies of what I'm showing. If anybody wants a copy of that, it will be. I've already spoken to Nicole. Once the video is done, we're also going to put the presentation up online. So all the slide deck will be up online along with the obviously the video from tonight as it is. Make it easy. All right, folks. So tonight we're going to be going over the fire department budget, emergency management, and the EMS or our ambulance service. Fire service. So a little bit just about who we are. So the fire department has myself as the chief. Brad Winters is deputy chief full-time. We have an on-call deputy chief, a captain, 5 lieutenants, and 11 firefighters. Those are all on-call people. These are the active members of the department. We have some others that participate and assist with some activities, but they're not firefighters. They don't go to fire scenes. They may help with motor vehicle accidents, with directing traffic. They may help, cleaning up, doing some support work, but these are our fire people. It's important to point out we have no regular firefighter staffing. So we don't have any firefighters at the station. They're all on call. They come in from home when the call goes off, get in the fire trucks, and respond to the emergency. We provide fire protection to Peterborough and to the town of Sharon through contracts, similar to the police department, our ambulance, recycling center, and a few others. So what do? Fire suppression, alarm investigation, motor vehicle accidents, hazardous materials, life safety inspections, and all other tasks as assigned. We actually did recently, this year, rescue a cat out of a tree, legitimately. We went up with our ladder truck and got it out. Made quite a splash doing that. A little bit of background just to provide some perspective. The fire department was founded in 1865, and what's really interesting if you read way back, there was a lot of debate in town. We had always had fire protection for the mills, Phoenix Mill, Noon's Mill, and the mill had their own fire departments, and they would come together and help fight fires downtown. When the town wanted to have a municipal fire department, the people downtown said, why would we pay for a fire department? The mills come to our rescue. People in the outskirts of town said, why would we pay for a fire department? They'll never get here to protect our property. So it took several years, and finally in 1865, the fire department was built. Originally it was all volunteer, or formed all volunteer. We transitioned to a paid on-call model with a full-time fire chief. Done Don here was our first full-time fire chief that the town of Peterborough ever hired back in 1988. We've had that. Our emphasis has become more and more on all hazards, not just going to fires anymore. And I don't think that's a surprise when you look at the different things that are going on in our world, the different things we do in our equipment. Something that's really important here is we are a member of Southwestern New Hampshire Fire Mutual Aid System, which encompasses 70-some odd communities in New Hampshire and Vermont. And what is super important about this is, you know, I went back before and talked about the 20 or so firefighters we have. With a call department, you really can only rely on about 25% of your personnel to respond at any given time. If it sounds really cool, you'll get about half of them, but that isn't nearly enough people to manage most of our incidents. So for things like that, we rely heavily on this mutual aid system. For example, we had a fire a few weeks ago over on Nichols Road on a Saturday afternoon and Sunday afternoon. And we had firefighters from Bennington, Francistown, Hancock, Greenfield, Temple, Dublin, Jaffrey. They were all there to assist us in that. Although our call volume varies, last year we had 401 calls, which is a 13% increase over 2003, but about 10 calls less than we had in 2023, but about 10 calls less than we had in 2022. So there really is a lot of variability there with that. Budget highlights, as you flip through, and hopefully I can grab the things here. Places you see some significant differences, increases, from last year. Salaries account, like all the departments in town, that salaries budget line item is based on the COLA and raises that were given this year and moving forward, along with the fact that we in the last few years have been very fortunate as a fire department to have attracted some people that are engaged and active with the department. So we are routinely hitting that 10 or 12 people per call for our calls. Yes, we don't always need those 10 or 12 people, but it's really nice to know that they're going to be there when we do, and that comes up. Retirement account, you notice, is a big jump between 25 and 26, but it's actually pretty close to the 24 number. That's due to that line item being underfunded this year. So we're actually already over in that line item, if you will. So that's a correction for an error that was made in last year's. And the last one within fire department administration is computer services. One of the things that we struggle with is finding a way to, or have struggled with, is finding a way to manage control of our assets. And our assets are big stuff like $1 million fire trucks and little stuff like a set of jaws or a toolbox or, you know, specifically nozzles and adapters that we have to operate at a fire scene. After some research that Deputy Winters and Deputy Fahey have done in sort of a fire service specific program, we're going to be contracting with a program called, software program called First Do. And First Do is designed around fire service. So they have a inventory model that allows us to set up, you know, our apparatus by compartments, by kits, so that we can really start to track that stuff and check it off. Because it's very easy for things to get misplaced or get broken or something comes out of service, and there's really no way to let people know that globally. This program will allow us to do that. As we move further into it next year, we'll also be adding modules in that allow us to track training, allow us to track individuals responding to calls, and taking over a lot of those functions, and putting a lot of stuff that we have splintered around into one place now to give us a better way to manage our data and those things. Fire operations, our salaries line item, again, same as the administration side. Protective clothing and uniforms, you'll see increases there. That is due to a recent law that went into effect in the state of New Hampshire that requires fire departments to move away from protective clothing and station uniforms that contain PFAS, or those forever chemicals that we've heard about. So this law went into effect, and it requires that as of January 1, so as of a month ago, you're no longer allowed to purchase any station uniforms that have PFAS in them. As of July 1, firefighters are not allowed to wear any station uniforms that have PFAS in them. So we're really now looking to transition 100% of what our firefighters are wearing in daily station wear between now and July 1 to PFAS-free gear.
How are they going to be disposed of?
Quite frankly, most people are probably going to continue to wear them not at work, because what's really interesting about this is you can wear a sweatshirt laden with PFAS, you can put your Under Armour socks and underwear and t-shirt on laden with PFAS. The law was strictly station uniform, which is pants and shirt. And quite frankly, I bet everybody sitting here in this audience is wearing something laden with PFAS now without even knowing it. So in the clothing, that's just sort of the reality of it. The turnout gear is a little more challenging. There's currently only one. Your turnout gear has multiple layers in it. The layer that contains most of the PFAS is the layer that's closest to your skin, as it would be. There's only one manufacturer right now that makes an alternative for that, so it's very difficult to get that turnout gear. We are going to be sampling a couple sets of that gear. We've actually put them on, we're getting ready to order those. There is no timeline for converting to protective clothing, because again, your protective clothing has a 10-year lifespan, and you're looking at thousands and thousands of dollars for a set of protective clothing. So we have that coming up through there, and working on that and trying to find something that will work that, but we are transitioning to the PFAS-free gear for that. And again, in fire training, the only real significant change is the salaries line. Again, it's related just like every other department in the community. Their salaries line item was, Carl.
I want to go back to that retirement number.
Sure.
You said there were about $30,000 increase from the previous year because the previous year wasn't properly budgeted.
Correct.
Right.
Do you have those numbers?
So my question is,
Yeah.
where did the money come from that was used to make up for the $30,000?
It's going to come from within our budget.
From what item? I mean, it has to come out of something.
It's going to be a conglomeration of everything. We're not specifically reducing one thing. Our goal is to make sure that when we hit June 30th, we have not gone over the total amount allocated for the fire department for this year.
So if I might editorialize?
Yep.
I think that means that it comes out of fund balance for next year
No.
because...
No,
No.
we're
No.
not, so.
Did you not spend some money somewhere that you would have spent?
Correct,
No.
so it's gonna, like, for instance, there might be, a little less training, or there may be some deferred purchases or deferred maintenance. Something will not be spent within the fire department's budget to make up for the unbudgeted retirement numbers.
So if you look at what the gross appropriation was for the fire department for the current fiscal year in fiscal '25, our goal is to stay below that number and absorb that $30,000 difference.
And if we can't absorb it within the fire department's budget, we'll find it elsewhere in the town budget. But we can't use fund balance to make up for the difference.
No, I didn't mean
Yeah.
that you were using fund balance.
No.
I meant that the fund balance is less than it would have been.
Correct, so there won't be, so any savings that might have been otherwise realized within the fire department's budget and would have gone to fund balance, you're correct.
That's what I mean.
They won't go, yes.
But the other token is we would have raised and appropriated that money through taxes had we not made the error in the calculation to begin with.
Yeah, thank you.
Excuse me, I would like to get a reaction from our budget committee on this expenditure for software, computer services. It's a $12,000 increase in the budget on that line.
Well, you've asked the question, Bob. Please elaborate.
For me or for? Oh.
Well, do you find that expense is reasonable?
Without explanation, I couldn't say.
Well, so
Oh, he did explain.
I did. I mean, so currently we have no concise way to track the equipment that we have. It's done through a combination of Excel spreadsheets. We have literally have a Google form somebody fills out if a piece of equipment is broken or damaged or they find it missing. We also look at recording. Jeff Winters brought up one other point, which is when we get into the next phase of it is the ability to do pre-planning, which I can explain in a minute. This gives us the opportunity to consolidate all those records into one place. So if you have a question about engine 1 and the equipment on engine 1, you're able to pull engine 1 up in this database and look at the air packs that are on it, look at the hose that is on it, look at the maintenance record for that, look at, a maintenance record includes everything from the routine oil changes to something that we broke and had to send out to get fixed. So it provides a concise database and a concise location to have that information
So this
maintained.
increase is a purchase of a software
Correct.
package?
Yes, it's a software package. So it's an initial setup, and I don't know the breakdown. Do you remember the breakdown?
I think about 3,000 of that was the initial
This
setup.
is the initial setup fee, and then the remainder of that is the maintenance fees and the support fees to get us, particularly through the first year, use into that hump to get comfortable using
So
the
this
software.
will not enjoy any support from town IT?
There's there's no extra work for Fosh or anything. I mean, we're doing it all on our own network. It's a cloud-based program.
Yeah.
We already have tablets in the ambulances, in the apparatus. We have desktop computers that everybody uses. So we don't have to add any additional infrastructure to it. That is the true cost.
Yeah.
Is it an ongoing expense annual?
There will be an ongoing expense annually, and I don't know what that is. Do you remember? I apologize.
Sorry, what was that?
About 9,000.
So
For
an
the other.
additional 9,000 a year to the operating budget.
Going forward.
But you're feeling like, so explain why the Google Sheet system isn't working for you. I mean, it's cloud-based.
Well, everything is not in one place. It is incredibly difficult for people, particularly in the environment where we don't have anybody there 5 days a week managing this stuff, to be able to look at it. I broke this, or I didn't find this working, so I filled my Google form, it goes to this spreadsheet over here. We're now doing our SCBA maintenance, so we look at this spreadsheet here, and we get our report back from IPS as our vendor that does the stuff. So here is the list of deficiencies and problems with this. Engine 1 now doesn't have 2 air packs because they're out for repair at IPS. You don't know that looking at engine 1, you have to go and look at the SCBA spreadsheet to see that. And we've found it very difficult for our officers and our people to track this stuff, where it is, what's coming in, what's going out. And if we had a full-time department, we may not need to do this because we'd have everybody there consistently, no more than 3 days being gone. But we have people dropping in and out, and we don't know who's doing our truck check on this month. It's a different group of people than were here the last month. Being able to maintain that consistency of everything immediately available to you, really no matter where you are, we think is going to be a great benefit to us.
Did you ask Fosh if it was possible to do that internally rather than going externally?
Even if we were to go internally, I'll use we have worked with Fosh in the past to build GIS applications. We have one. We have a layer within the town's GIS database through Corbin, which is his GIS consultant. We spent around $9,000 or $10,000 5 years ago building that. So even that incurs a cost. And the maintenance of that layer, I mean, it doesn't come out of our budget, but it comes out of the budget that Fosh pays Corbin Associates to maintain his overall GIS platform, his GIS programs.
And that's just like the hydrants and other...
Yeah, hydrants, and it connects to the utilities, so it pulls data from the utilities down that we have. It includes your catch basins, so from an emergency management standpoint, we can look at catch basins, culverts. We have we have all our hydrants.
That's not, we're talking about.
Oh, yeah, no.
We're talking about something completely.
Oh, no, but I'm saying
But it's related.
it's related because it ties into that through what Fosh is doing, so that's why Fosh is
Right,
supporting that,
what
because
Fosh
there's a
is
connection,
doing,
yeah.
But the
not
question
this
was,
request.
can Fosh support, his department, support operational stuff, which this thing is really focused on? It's not focused on GIS and...
I don't know
So
I don't know if they could, but it's out of their
It's out of their wheelhouse.
mission, yeah, I mean, that's...
So Fosh and his department supports town-wide operations with very limited exceptions. Those limited exceptions are the town clerk's operations that is specific to the department, the town clerk's department, and the police department's, connection to the state and the software that they have to do that. Other than that, every department does their own software support and maintenance contracts. So, because they're just too many, and they're too hyper-specific to the needs of that particular department. So this would be another one of the situations where it sounds like something that, could, like in theory, a capital management system like that might be useful for another department, but this one is very specifically tailored to the needs of a fire department, so it's something that they're specifically looking for.
Would you, given that we're also going to have to shell out for protective clothing and uniforms this year by law, is this something you would be willing to defer till next year or the year after?
Yes, we can certainly defer it. I guess I realize every dollar's a dollar, but this is a $12,000 item that will allow us to better track millions of dollars worth of inventory in an $18 million municipal budget.
So you wouldn't be willing?
We would be able to, but I'm just saying, are we being penny wise and pound foolish to look at potentially spending another year or two without perfect reconciliation of millions of dollars worth of equipment that's parked in the fire station for saving $12,000 in an $18 million townwide budget? I mean, you have to answer that question, not me. I just don't, I don't.
And you're only one budget.
Right.
You're only one department.
Right.
Saying exactly that. It's only $12,000.
Right. Oh, I understand that.
So it's not a great argument.
But even if every department saved you $12,000, it'd be about $150.
Okay.
I mean, just saying.
Chief,
Mary.
what other departments locally or in the state regionally use this?
Brad did that research.
Bo,
You have an email. You want
I put
yeah.
on the list of-
There are half a dozen departments in the state that use it.
Durham, Concord, were the big three that got back to us.
And what have they told you about pros and cons of this particular?
Great support, it's helped with their maintenance, tracking, record keeping. The pre-plan, which the chief
Yeah, I
hadn't
didn't
got
get
into
into.
yet, is a huge part of it. It's got a mobile responder component to it, so as soon as our dispatch center in Keene gets the call, it'll get a CAD push to our phones. We'll be able to track who's coming to see if we need additional help or not. From that CAD push, we'll be able to tap a pre-plan module of the program. And it'll tell us all the hazards that's in the building, where the alarm panels are located, different ways to access, key holder information. It's a pretty robust system for the pre-plan portion of this.
So this goes well beyond inventory control.
Well beyond.
Yeah, in the.
All of our apparatus checks.
A year from now.
Yeah, once it's complete.
So do we have fire pre-plans now?
No. Just
Very limited, very limited.
kind of.
Hydrant locations, as Nicole mentioned, Knox box locations, some utility shutoffs.
So what's the investment in putting all the data into the system prior to turning it on?
Brian and John, who are full-time, have been doing a lion's share of that to get it set up now.
And who would be responsible for keeping the information updated on a daily basis?
We would.
We would do it as we see
Essentially, yeah, it
changes.
would be-
Because obviously it's only as good as the data
Correct,
that's
oh
in
yeah,
there.
absolutely.
And that is another, you can, with the proper permissions from our end users, our officers, if they go out on a call and the fire alarm panels change locations, they can make those edits on the fly and update that pre-plan. So as we go into buildings, we can confirm and/or change any of that critical information.
And we are doing inspections. I mean, most of our commercial buildings, either Brad or I or somebody else is in annually. So it gives us, again, now if we have this information stored in a single place, it gives us the ability to go in and validate that, to your point, and make sure that is updated.
You mentioned that the $9,000 was the cost that would be incurred next year. Is that adding the next component to that, or is that just $9,000?
That will be all the components we wish to use.
That's our annual maintenance fee at that point in time,
That's
becomes the
what-
$9,000.
So it will be annual in
Yes.
forever.
Perpetuity.
Forever, yeah.
Until it goes up.
It's that contract fee that Tyler was shaking his head at about our ambulance narcotic safes.
That is the trade-off with anything that's cloud-based. There is always a hefty ongoing contract.
Would it have been more appropriate to discuss this originally as CIP though? I mean, it's a fairly substantial cost, over $10,000.
It's not a capital item, this is generally considered operating, so we've handled these through operating in the past.
It's funny because we did the finance upgrades through the CIP.
That required a database purchase as well.
What does the select board think about this?
Said that quietly.
It's only $12,000, you know. Why should I argue about it?
Andy?
It's just infuriating, each computer costs are just going up. We have a full IT department for 6,000 people. It's just crazy. Anyway.
I think it's really important to keep in mind this is a significant investment in the long-term durability of not only the equipment, but also the safety of the firefighters when they respond to the scene when it was there.
I'll take that into account.
Andy, did you want to raise a point, maybe?
Are we, I didn't know if we were taking questions from the audience yet.
Always.
So, I just wanted to ask from an end user standpoint, chief and deputies, do you feel that $12,000 and $9,000 every year going forward and possibly more is a worthy investment for what you're going to get for, I mean, only you guys know what truly you're getting for this amount of money. Do you feel that it's a good investment for that amount of money?
Yeah.
Wouldn't have put it forward if we didn't.
Thank you.
How many buildings in town do we think would fit and be appropriate to have a pre-fire plan for?
In a perfect world, the goal would be anything in town that is not a 1 or 2 family home.
Dozens?
That is not.
Yeah, would it be dozens of buildings?
Oh, hundreds, 100 plus. Yeah, definitely in the dozens. And the other thing that becomes difficult to the point about the pre-plan, you know, I look back at, when you look at the number of people that we have in the department, you never know who's going to be showing up. You never know what they're, it could be somebody who's brand new, it could be somebody like Brad who's grown up in town his whole life and, you know, ran around those buildings, you know, on mini bikes. But I mean, it's, so, you know, to your point, having that information in a single place also can help operational, you know, both resident safety and responder safety.
I have a question for Tyler, in that it raises a question for me. We're always faced with increasing costs, of course, but is there any attempt to find places where we could save money, or should we be asking that question of each department, not just the fire, obviously not just the fire department?
I think the department heads actually do that rather frequently, and I know Nicole is always working in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just as with the $30,000 in the salary or the retirement budget, you know, behind the scenes, things are being figured out, you know, to kind of offset that. Yeah, you can ask, you can always ask. But I know
Is it a
actively
function of the budget committee itself, which is what I would also say.
I would just return to the operating budget that was presented to me, and I passed along to you with very few edits, was below the cost of living increase that we suggested. It's effectively a flat budget. So they did. I think they really took to heart the request that we go through, comb through everything, make sure that what we're requesting is what we really need.
Would the is it the Virginia Brown Trust Fund that we talked about earlier?
Helen
Brown. Yep.
Could she buy this out of her interest,
Theoretically?
theoretically?
Theoretically, yes. You could choose one of those other things not to support with the Helen Brown funds, but then it would be, you'd still have an annual maintenance cost that would have to be, whether that came out of Helen Brown funds and if that's considered to be a good use of those funds. We have tended to look at the Helen Brown funds as being for purchases of equipment or training that was more of a one-time thing as opposed to an ongoing supplement to the budget.
Someone asked where the select board weighed in or
Yes,
thought about
I
it.
think I asked him.
I've been kind of listening and thinking about the work I do and trying to equate having a trailer for all your tools or just bringing everything you have in the car and it gets put on shelves everywhere. And I equate this as like a trailer that's organized. When you're done using that, it goes back in its place in the next person's wherever. It's the difference between a handyman and a professional contractor. And I think this is, especially graduating into this new fire station, these guys have been bootstrapping it in that hole for decades, and things get put on shelves, you know, maybe not literally, but This is an organizational must, I think. I think it's small money for a big improvement in their operations.
I think also you should recognize the investment here for the computer software and that is a small amount of the investment that will be made to do the inventory and enter the data. And to use the tool to make these pre-fire plans, that's a considerable expense and time on the part of the guys doing it. If they do it right, the first time they use the pre-fire plan, it will save that building money because the fire will be smaller. It will save lives because firefighters will know where to go. They'll know where the hazard materials are. They'll know that there are 2 propane tanks out back that need to have cold water on them or they're going to explode in the next 15 minutes. They'll know about the hazardous chemicals and where the hell to get people away from it, and which buildings in town are dangerous to the rest of the community. It'll take them quite a while to fill in those pre-fire plans. Those pre-fire plans are required by national fire protection standards. There's a small amount of money for the town to pay to get a huge payback if it's only used one time in the next 20 years. And I can speak to you about it because I spent 10 years of my life inspecting emergency management programs around this country. And that's a significant thing to have.
I think we've had a robust discussion. I think we can move on.
Okay. Emergency management. So, really, emergency management is every department in the town. It's really coming here together to oversee planning, preparation, response, recovery, mitigation, emergencies, disasters, including pretty much everything that can happen. And we've had something in virtually all that category just in the 10 years that I've been here. A couple key things for the upcoming year, though. We'll be updating the town's emergency operation plan. That's what we call our LEOP, or Local Emergency Operations Plan. We're going to be beginning work. In fact, on March 18th, the Select Board will be voting to accept a state grant to hire a consultant to help work with us on the hazard mitigation plan. It'll be done in late 2026. But one of the most important things that we'll do, and that's what's driving us getting this done, is Homeland Security and Emergency Management, the New Hampshire department within the Department of Safety, has several pretty robust grant programs. One of them is a generator program. It offers up to a 50% match for generators for emergency operations centers and critical infrastructure. So we're looking to work with that once we get the final specs and costs for the generator for the fire station. There are also grant funding available for certain features of the training room / emergency operations center in that building. So one of the biggest things we'll be doing over the next year and a half is working with our state partners to ensure that we have maximized the grants that are available to offset some of those costs as we go forward for that. EMS. Not the store that just closed down on Bose Farm Road. Emergency medical services. So for the discussion tonight on emergency medical services, we wanted to take a little bit of a deeper dive. The town has had an ambulance service since 1972. For a long time, it was supported out of taxpayers. Then it moved into self-supporting funds, into a revolving fund and an enterprise account at various times in its existence. And now it's back into taxpayer, back into the general fund, tax supported. During the period when it left tax supported and came back into tax supported, a lot of things changed. And we, as the department and administration, didn't really do that good a job letting everybody know about what all those changes were. And a lot of people didn't ask questions about those changes because it really didn't affect them, because it was out of that revolving fund, an enterprise fund. So as we go through this presentation, and this presentation will move at the speed of the audience. So if anybody has questions, slow me down. If you start to roll your eyes, I will speed up. So just keep that in mind. Is a municipal ambulance service public safety or a healthcare business? And that's going to be critical as we talk about some of these things going on through this. So who are we? We have an active staff of 15 EMTs, 8 AEMTs, one of them is full-time, 9 paramedics, 7 of those are full-time. We staff 2 ambulances, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, which works out to 35,040 man-hours annually. Ideally, both of our ambulances are staffed at the paramedic level. Our primary service area serves 13,200 people across 167 square miles. That is the towns of Peterborough, Sharon, Dublin, Temple, Hancock, and Francistown. And our extended service area serves another 25,000 people across another 195 square miles. And that includes really all of our surrounding towns: Jaffrey, Dublin, Jaffrey, Ringe, Greenfield, Greenville, New Ipswich, Lineborough, Antrim, and Bennington. So what are the levels of EMS provider? We talked about 4 levels, and these levels are set by a national standard. So it's a national competency that all of our providers meet. We have EMR, EMT, AMT, and paramedic. A transport ambulance in New Hampshire must have 2 licensed providers on it. At least one of them has to be greater than EMR, so you can only have 1 EMR. We do not use EMRs. EMRs are emergency medical responders. They're really designed to provide a level of training and certification to first do people on a scene. A lot of the towns around us have members of their rescue squads that are EMRs, so the people that have a valid skill set that can actually render aid, and the state knows that level of aid that they're able to render. EMTs, initial level of pre-hospital care. I'm proud to say I've been one for 42 years. But around 120 to 200 hours of training. Really, we deal with immediate life-threatening things: cardiac, respiratory, trauma. We, with rare exception, don't do anything that is really invasive. We will give, we can give a shot with epinephrine, but that's really about as invasive as we get as a basic EMT. Basic EMT transports a patient. The bill can range between $444, which is what New Hampshire Medicaid would pay us, up to our top billed rate of $1,033 plus our mileage. Advanced EMT, an additional 180 hours or so of training. They work towards more of the things for advanced life support. They can establish vascular access, so they can start IVs or IOs. They can deliver a whole bunch of medications that actually can make a huge difference for people that are suffering critical medical emergencies. And because they're providing a higher level of care, we can bill them at a higher level. So a New Hampshire Medicaid patient who is treated and transported at the AMT level, we will receive $527 for that. We will bill that at $1,450.85 is our top billed rate, and again, mileage would go on top of that. Paramedics. Paramedics are the cream of the crop. Just ask them. No, but yeah, in all seriousness, paramedics are the top tier. Really, paramedic is equivalent to a 2-year degree, and that's in addition to at least an AEMT. So your paramedics have gone through about 2,000 hours of training in all aspects of caring for critically ill patients, including cardiac, respiratory, medical emergencies, trauma. They will interpret EKGs. They can provide a lot of invasive treatments to patients with cardiac or respiratory or traumatic problems. They can do cardioversion in the back of the ambulance. They can intubate patients or do surgical crikes for somebody who otherwise cannot get air to breathe. They do a lot of advanced medications. Earlier we talked about the narcotics and controlled substances that are used, that quite often there is no other alternative to save life for that, and looking at that. The thing that's really key about the paramedics is what the paramedic does in an area like we are, which is rural New Hampshire, with a critical access hospital. is the paramedic is able to provide care to that patient in the field that can be continued for a further distance. So we can take that patient, example, if somebody in this town is having a heart attack, a myocardial infarction, or a STEMI, if I am treating them in the ambulance, I have to take them to Monadnock Community Hospital where they can receive that definitive level of care that they need immediately. The paramedic, if John Fahey is there, he can provide that definitive care in the ambulance, and they can go directly to Concord Hospital, directly to Catholic Medical Center, where they can go to cardiac catheterization and get that definitive care right away. That's one of the biggest differences. If you have that trauma patient, they can give them fluids, they can give them medications to control bleeding, to assist with increasing blood pressure in a patient who has volume loss, and allow us to transport those patients to the hospital that they need to be at to receive the care that is absolutely critical for them. Continuing on, they can generate a much larger range of bill in looking at this. So your New Hampshire Medicaid patient who is treated at the ALS 2 level, which is, what is it, 3 or more, a couple different medications or 3 or more interventions?
IV push medications, intubation, manual electricity, things of that nature.
Things of that nature. Brings it up to the 763 with up to $2,100, almost $2,200 for our current top rate. New Hampshire Medicaid for specialty care, which you can get tripped into with a couple of different things. Can get us up into the almost $1,000 or just over $900 for a Medicaid patient, and over $2,500 for transport. The other thing too, looking at this, is, as I mentioned, it allows us the opportunity to transport those patients a further distance. Our average distance for a patient in the town of Peterborough, so our residents, is 5 miles. That's the average distance to Monadnock Community Hospital. For our patients that are going to that facility to deliver the definitive care, the Concord Hospital, the Catholic Medical Center, Elliott Hospital, UMass, again, depending upon the situation, that can be 25 or more miles, which again, it's not about the money, but it also is an opportunity through this level, this provider level, to generate additional income for the service. What makes us different? Sorry.
So when we look at those fees, are those the net to the town, or is that the gross that you're allowed to bill? Or
This here is the net. So Medicaid is a fixed rate. So New Hampshire, it doesn't matter what you bill. We'll get into more on billing, but for both Medicaid and Medicare, those are set rates. We receive an amount back. We have no say in that amount. We take it, and we are not allowed to balance bill or get any more from the patient. Exception being some secondary insurances for your Medicare patients. A lot of Medicare patients have secondary or supplemental insurances. They'll pay some of that difference. This is the rate that we bill. Very rarely do we receive 100% of that. Most of the time we will receive a percentage of that from the insurance company, and the patient will be responsible for the rest. If the patient doesn't pay it or can't pay it, or quite often we have a lot of patients who can demonstrate financial hardship. We work with Monadnock Community Hospital. Monadnock Community Hospital, through their billing department, has an analysis or a formula they use to determine hardship, and they will discount patients' medical fees by 25, 50, 75, or 100%. We follow their program. So if somebody, even patients that don't go to Monadnock Community Hospital, we'll work with them to determine their payment eligibility, and we accept that same write-off or deferment based upon their ability to pay.
You told us earlier how many calls you get from the fire department. How many calls do you get that require paramedics?
We're going to get to that. If you can hold on, there's a chart for that.
Hold on.
So we are allowed to do two. We have two specific skills that we are allowed to do in the field that are called prerequisite protocols. So they're not something that every ambulance service is allowed to do automatically. It's a protocol that is done in collaboration with the New Hampshire Bureau of EMS. our medical control hospital, medical resource hospital, which is Banana Community Hospital, and our department being willing to do it. Those two things are, first one is called Rapid Sequence Innovation, or RSI. And what that is that is when an individual who is starting to significantly decompensate in their ability to provide their own oxygenation to protect their own airway, that could be through trauma or through medicine, through a medical problem. What it allows us to do is it allows us, by us I mean the paramedics, what it allows the paramedics to do is they will sedate that person, paralyze that person, and then intubate them. So that you don't have to wait until they've decompensated to the point where you potentially have brain damage or have tissue damage because their oxygenation has been so poor. Milford and Keene are the only other ones in this whole area that do that, and just last week we had the opportunity to provide RSI to a resident here in Peterborough to assist her. Another is what's called the iStat. The iStat is about that big. It allows you to test blood. So you can do a blood draw and test that blood. Currently, the biggest test that we're using it for consistently is for a particular enzyme that is only given off during heart attacks. So we will do, if somebody is having chest pain with a nondescript EKG, they will draw that, and it's called troponin. They'll look at the troponin, and troponin above a certain level is indicative of a heart attack. In addition, the one other huge advantage to us doing the troponin in the field is the hospital is going to want to repeat that troponin in 45 minutes, and that will help guide some of the course that they do. So our ability to do that in the field, we arrive at CMC in half an hour, 40, 45 minutes, they can immediately repeat that troponin, as opposed to doing the first draw in the emergency department and having to wait that 45 minutes. The iStat is actually a collaboration with Catholic Medical Center through their lab. We are a CLIA approved lab, but we're working through Catholic Medical Center in their lab, and they've been hugely supportive of this program since the start. In addition, we also do some other blood gas measurements and things, look at internal bleeding, also look at certain markers for massive infection, somebody who could have infection or other electrolyte issues. We have some individuals internally who are credited as critical care paramedics, although there's very little we can do from a treatment standpoint for critical care. What it does is the individuals who've gone through this have done, what's the training program?
It really depends. There's a lot of different ways to kind of get there. Not all the programs are created equal, but you're looking at upwards of another 1,000 hours of training, depending on which institution you go through. But as the chief was kind of getting at, the training there doesn't give you anything in the way of interventions per se. That's not something that the state of New Hampshire really allows us to get into. But it does allow us to make more educated decisions and to make sure that if given the opportunity, we are taking people to the most appropriate facility that can manage their care. If somebody is going to need ICU level care, such as the patient that's been RSI'd, these folks are going to be the ones that have the background to manage them for a much longer distance to get them to UMass or Manchester or wherever it happens to be.
Chief, do you have any idea now that CMC is being acquired by a for-profit hospital, how that might affect your program?
I don't think it will affect that, and quite frankly, if it does, I'm pretty confident the Elliott would be more than happy to support us in our lab work. In fact, yeah, I'm 100% confident the Elliott would be happy to take that over.
Half the cardiac folks from
Yeah.
CMC went there?
Yeah, maybe part of it. The Elliott, from what I'm hearing, the Elliott is doing a whole lot to pick up some of that stuff that is starting to fall by the wayside through some of the changes that are going on at CMC. The other thing that really sets us apart, and this is something that, a phrase that I think John and I, maybe Matt, first came up with 3-4 years ago, was really looking at patient-focused care. It is really about caring for the patients. We have a lot of people in this town that have a pretty high expectation. They want to know that when they call 911 or have any kind of an issue in this community, that that issue is going to be addressed with them in mind. The old mantra for most of your ambulance services was, you know, pardon my language, scoop and screw. You pick them up, bring them to the hospital, get back to the station, do whatever you're doing. We really are focused on looking at, okay, here's how Ed is presenting in his living room. What is he going to need to be discharged? And making that decision to go to that hospital that can provide the proper care. Not going to, you know, and again, nothing against Manana Community Hospital, but Manana Community Hospital is a critical access hospital. They will never do brain surgery. They will probably never have cardiac catheterization. That's just, it's not going to happen there. So understanding people need that and transporting them to the appropriate facility and looking at doing that. So we really try to make sure that the patient goes to where we feel is also most appropriate, but also where they can get the best care. If you have somebody who has a complex medical problem and they're being followed at Concord Hospital, the Elliott Hospital, or Southern New Hampshire, we want to be able to take you there. We want to take you there because, again, it doesn't do any good to go to Monadnock Community Hospital, have them communicate with your physician and realize, yeah, the place that you really need for care is that other facility, and then have to move them. So we're really, really focusing on that. You know, and the numbers here, 80% of our patients do go to Monadnock. The rest that we transport to other facilities, it's a combination of patient request, but also patient need. A little bit of history, and I'll go through this pretty quick, just to sort of tell you how we are. Started the ambulance service in '72. Any of you remember Mert Dyer was the fire chief at the time, bought a used Cadillac ambulance. We actually ended up buying our second ambulance in '78 because the first ambulance was too busy. That was also a Cadillac. Somebody should have kept those, they're gorgeous. In '97, was switched to an enterprise account, the idea of fully funding itself. At this point in time, I don't think we were actually paying people, we still volunteer. Yep, still volunteer at that point in time.
Minimal pay.
Minimal, yeah, like wasn't an hourly, you know, a wage per se. So the money that was brought in really for, to support the building itself, the training and stuff like that. In the early 2000s, we began billing patients and applying that revenue to cover the costs. Prior to billing the patients, it was the money that would build the other communities that would go into that. Any donations that came in and for the ambulance service, instead of going to the general fund, they would go into this fund. Early 2000, we did that and moved that. 2004, the select board in this town and the fire chief realized that it was not acceptable to wait 8, 10, 12, 15, 20 minutes sometimes to get an ambulance on the road or a fire truck on the road. We started staffing the station with our call firefighters and EMTs. We call it the day crew because, again, nighttime, most people are at home. They can respond to calls. Daytime, your call firefighters are out at their real jobs. So we started doing that and moving in there. At that point in time, call volume was small enough that they would just hop on the fire truck and the ambulance, whoever came first. Over the years, the money that was in our revolving fund enterprise account at that point in time, it was in the enterprise account, was used to pay for a few other things. A portion of town administrator's salary was covered out of that, a portion of tax collector's salary, finance director's salary, a few other things that were, because we were bringing money in from the outside, there was the realization that those functions in town are supporting this operation, but being 100% taxpayer funded, so money was being pulled out of those funds to help cover some of that. We've always pulled various amounts in. Anybody who remembers way back, there was always this line in the fire department budget, $50,000 for transferred ambulance fund. That was a placeholder to allow the select board to adjust that up or down. Some years none got used, some years a lot more got used. It sort of depended where we were. We have always worked with Monadnock Community Hospital to move patients out. Way back in the 70s, they'd grab the doctor or the nurse, they'd put them in the back of the Cadillac ambulance, and Jim Grant or, Bernie Cutter, any one of those folks would drive them off to the hospital they had to go to. In 2012, a pilot program was started between Manatee Community Hospital and Peterborough Fire and Rescue to move patients, and that was the direct result of Rockingham Ambulance failing. They went out of business. They've been the ones that have done that. The town's goal with the program at the time was really to increase create as much ambulance revenue as we could to make it really cost neutral to the Peterborough taxpayer. So really what that did was that shifted the operation of the ambulance service from a cost center, like all of our other town departments. We justify the money that it's going to take to provide the level of service we have, to a profit center. The goal really became revenue. In 2014, our model really became more of what a private ambulance company would have as opposed to a public ambulance. We quite frankly got away from, as an organization, focusing on the 911 patients to meeting the needs of Manatee Community Hospital. So one of the things that did too was removing our ability to we had two crews available. We usually would have somebody in the station, so we always had a couple people to hop in that fire truck to supplement, waiting for the firefighters to come in. Once, by about 2015-16, we pretty much had an ambulance on the road 24 hours a day doing a transfer out of Manatee Community Hospital. The additional mileage we put on our trucks and the call times really caused us to increase our fleet, both for the sake of maintenance of the fleet and just preserving it, and also to give us enough ambulances back here so that as we were doing those 2 or 3 transfers at a time, we could still meet our 911 demand. We bought 2 ambulances late in 2017. Those are our A1 and our A3, the Mercedes you see. They were the first ambulances with the checkerboard. It also led to a need for more staff. 2016, we added a crew to the night, providing our first 24-hour staffing. Between 2016 2017, we had a second daytime ambulance. In 2017, we had to start hiring our first full-time staff. Paramedics were at a premium, and you need paramedics for the majority of transfers that go out of the hospital. So we really had to have those paramedics available. It was very difficult in a part-time world to get people, particularly when most of our paramedics worked full-time jobs somewhere else. It's very difficult to have them available on that part-time basis. 2018, we added the night crew, so we had 2 ambulances in the station 24/7. And then at the same time, the town started to shift the non-EMS costs that were taken out of that fund. As I mentioned, town administrator, finance director, tax collector were the 3 sort of big ones that were in there, and moved those back into operating. And that was really, as we started to increase the costs, we were starting to see the revenues leveling out, despite the fact the costs are increasing with the full-time staff, because we're now paying for benefits that we weren't paying for before, and doing that. So as we really focused on doing those transfers, one of the problems we had is we created an artificial capacity with our staff. All of our people are public employees, New Hampshire retirement system. Under New Hampshire retirement system, employees that work 32 hours or more have to be offered benefits. So we were routinely having people sort of skip over that here and there to get that 32. When it's onesies, twosies, and an all 911 ambulance service, it's not a problem. As we start to get into the transfer side, and we had more and more of these people doing it, and it wasn't necessarily done intentionally, but you're scheduled to work Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, well, all of a sudden on Monday, you're leaving 2 hours late because you had to go to Dartmouth. And on Wednesday, you're leaving an hour late, and on Friday, you're leaving 3 hours late. That starts to add up. And we were losing control of ensuring that our people were available when we needed them to be available, going through that. Then there's that little pesky pandemic thing. Huge drop in call volume. As you folks are probably all aware, our revenue is directly related to our call volume. If we don't move patients, we don't have any revenue. You know, our staff members, along with all members in really medicine in general, ask any hospital, I don't think there's a single hospital in the state of New Hampshire that has the same number of inpatient beds now that it had in 2019. People started to leave. We had to adjust our wage structure. We had to adjust more positions to full-time to ensure that we would be able to have that quality staff that we were there. And our operating costs in some areas have gone up as much as 20%. Those of you who have looked at capital and just looked at prices, you know, the last ambulance we bought was the 2019 F550, beautiful ambulance, $345,000, I think, for that was the price, more or less. We're looking at over $500,000 for the ambulance we ordered a year ago that hasn't even, we don't have a chassis for yet. And looking at that. Medicare and Medicaid, which is about 65% of our total patient volume, those rates have not gone up at all, basically, and not even close to what all of the associated operating costs are with that. Starting in 2021, taxpayers began to provide more significant funding to the ambulance service. 2021, that was $400,000 through a special warrant article. 2022, the $328,738. 2023, the $458,34. So we started to sort of see that trend up. Excuse me. The other thing that went on is, you may remember prior to the successful fire station vote, the year before that, we had a less than stellar attempt at a new fire station. We, Nicole, town administration, and the fire department had intended in that year to originally present to the taxpayers moving the fire department from the
Ambulance.
fund, what?
Ambulance service.
I'm sorry, ambulance, from the ambulance, from the special revenue fund into the operating budget. We did not want to confuse the overall discussion about the fire station project with that move at the same time. So we opted not to do that, to give it one more year. That was the year that was the $450,834, to try to keep that afloat. As you know, the fire station project had a myriad of problems that year. It did not move forward that year, which got us into town meeting of 2024 for our fiscal 25, where we really were forced to move both things at the same time. In the intervening time, in June of 23, we really no longer had the capacity to do the transfers. We were barely able to staff our ambulances as it was. You know, Deputy Fahey, Deputy Winters, and myself as full-time staff were regularly pulling ambulance shifts. I live in town, Deputy Winters lives in town. We were covering the ambulance at night, just to make sure that we had that base level of protection to our residents and the residents in our contract communities. And then, as you all know, in May of 24, we shifted the entire ambulance operating budget into the general fund. The net anticipated cost is $888,724. So, as we've worked through the ambulance service during my entire tenure here, and Nicole will say it goes back before that, really our base assumptions are that the access to emergency medical services is something that is critical to our residents. It's no secret we have an aging population, and the old people and young people disproportionately have more serious incidents and need the ambulances. Our priority really is to make sure that the people that are paying for our service, the people that are depending on our service, which are the residents and that core group of people, are getting our service. We also believe that all of our stakeholders want us to deliver the highest level of care possible. They don't want to go back to 1971 when either Woodbury or Jellison's would put the red light on top of the hearse, zip to your house, and give you a ride up to the top of the hill of Parmalee, and the doctor there would treat you, which is what people did before they had ambulances. And the other reality is that we are incredibly fortunate in this town because back in 2004, as I mentioned, The select board and the fire chief and the voters understood that there was a problem with relying on that call and volunteer model to ensure a critical service. As we've made all the changes over time that I've talked about, they've been small changes. Yes, some have been very expensive, I don't mean that, but they've been small changes to an operational model that has ensured we always have a Peterborough ambulance available to those people that are depending on it. If you look at the communities around us and the services around us, this morning we had 4 ambulance calls going on at the same time. 2 of them were to other communities. So we are very fortunate that we have been able to continue to provide service to the people in our communities that rely on that. So again, is it public safety or is it insurance, healthcare? And the reason this is important: who funds public safety? Who funds healthcare? Part of the fundamental discussion.
Nobody called.
What? Nobody funds it. Well, yeah.
Can I just go back for a sec? So in that history, I believe it said at one point that the staff was sort of artificially inflated to support this business model. But you're not doing transfers anymore.
Correct.
Is that correct? But you also had trouble finding staff, so did that just level set where we now have, let's say we had 10 people because of the transfer service, but now we have 5 because we're only doing 911? Or are you continuing to staff at that higher level?
So the issue wasn't staff, it's hours. So if you look at the number of people we had back in 21 and 22, it's a similar number of people, but we were working them beyond what is reasonable for these part-time people to work, quite frankly, beyond what is legal for these, what is legal for these part-time people to work. So
Without providing them benefits.
yeah, so what happened was we created an artificial capacity by having people work more hours than we should have.
The capacity was artificial.
The capacity was artificial, yeah, not the staffing, yeah.
That's what I get.
Yeah, in doing that. So, our question. So, little quick conversation about call volume and revenue. 911 is an aggregate of data from 14 to 8, starting in fiscal 18 up through fiscal 24. So here's our responses by fiscal. You can see again, big drop in COVID, but then it continued to go right back up, and there was a pretty significant or pretty consistent trend line there going up. Again, mutual aid, I talked about the stability of our service and our service model. Again, this drop here is related to the drop in COVID and overall drop in calls, but again, that consistent model going up in that program. One thing I think is kind of interesting to look at, and this is what drove our staffing and originally, first adding the second ambulance during the daytime and then adding it tonight. If you look at our volume of calls and how our call volume is distributed, the significant amount of that call volume is between sort of the 8 a.m. and the 8 p.m. But what's really kind of neat...
Is this just for last year, or is this...
This is the aggregate of those, all those years from 18 to 24. So this is that aggregate. But what's interesting is it really picks up here. Our shift change is at 8 a.m. and it's not at all uncommon that a shift change is an ambulance out on a call as it starts to come up. Did you have something, Nicole? You looked like you... Top dispatch reasons. So if you look at all of our 911 calls and all the reasons we're dispatched, we broke these 4 out for a reason which I'll explain in a minute. But this is sort of how all of this, all of these calls fall in. Again, this is our top 10 reasons, and it's that 6-year aggregate of data. So the reason that we broke these out is falls, chest pain, difficulty breathing, and altered mental status are call determinants or call types that are disproportionately towards our older population. This is the average age of our patient by year. So as you can see, the average age of our patient is going up. So as our average patient for everything goes up, Also, our number of calls for the types of patients that are disproportional to the senior citizens is going up. And looking at that. Now we'll get into the numbers Carl was questioning and looking at that. We talked a little before about the difference in billing value for basic EMT versus an AMT versus a paramedic, and your Medicaid, New Hampshire Medicaid versus open billing. Only 65% of the calls we go on result in a transport. So 35% of the time our ambulance is dispatched, we do not transport a person. Whole myriad of reasons for that. Some could be ambulances are automatically dispatched to any motor vehicle accident if it's a rollover or any motor vehicle accident supported trapment. More often than not, knock on wherever I can find wood here, our ambulance gets there, the person isn't really hurt. Airbags have done their job, they've been wearing their seatbelt, they get out of the car. No, really, I'm fine. We evaluate them, we agree they're fine, they don't need to go to the hospital. Others are those people that slip and fall, and you just help getting back into the chair, getting back into bed. You don't transport those people, we can't bill those people. Accidental medical alarms that go off, good intent calls. You know, those are all the things that we can't bill. A patient who is deceased, you know, we may work a cardiac arrest, we may perform, interventions on a cardiac arrest, half an hour, 45 minutes or an hour, tie up 6, 8, 10 people, go through hundreds of dollars worth of disposable materials. We can't bill that. We can't bill that individual, nor would we really want to. But we can't bill that individual. So those are 35% of the time we go out, we can't even bill. So when you look at those that overall call volume, only 65% of that time do we have an opportunity to get back any revenue. Of those people we transport, believe it or not, and again, this is a 6-year aggregate, half of those people are BLS, half are ALS. So if you remember looking back at that, the difference of that $300 some odd up to that $700 some odd, for your BLS patient, there is a much lower reimbursement rate for about half of our calls than there is for the other half of those calls, as we look at that. Billed amount, and this is something that is, it's sort of hard to understand. I'll go through a couple different things. So these light colored lines are the amount that we billed. So that's the amount that we sent out, our billing company sent to the people that we transported. This darker line is what we received in revenue. So this is the percentage of revenue, or what we call recovery percentage, that we had. One of the things that's really important to look at when you get this, I talked about New Hampshire Medicaid and how that rate is a fixed rate, and Medicare is the same way. We don't, even if we bill you $1,000, if we bill you $1,000 and Medicare pays us $300, we don't count that $700 as money we've lost, because it's money we were never entitled to. Under federal law, we were only entitled to that $300 to begin with. So you have that. The next slide's a little simpler, because what it really shows,
Does that show the money that you're not entitled to on this graph?
No. Well, yes and no. Because if you look here, this is the percentage we've received of what we are eligible for. No, John, how's that?
That is percentage of overall bill, so
Overall bill,
yes, that
sorry.
is included.
That is included then. What's really interesting here is the trend line down for our revenue. So even though our call volume's gone up, even though annually, almost annually, the select board approved an increase in ambulance rates, our revenue continues to decline for that.
And that's primarily because of Medicaid and Medicare?
Medicare and Medicaid being a higher percentage, and not keeping track with what those amounts are and getting that. The other part of it too, and it really, and I don't know all the ins and outs, but shift in the way the country administers healthcare has made a big change too. Right now we're in January, February, and March are traditionally our lowest revenue months, because December 31st, everybody's deductibles reset. So we have all these people with the high deductible plans that may have met their deductible over the course of last year. They get transported in December, insurance company pays their bill. They get transported January 1st, they're on the hook for it because they have these high deductible plans. And we're not seeing a lot of that. We take anybody who doesn't pay us that difference, who hasn't appealed to Monadnock and gotten that, we send them to collections and look at that. But anybody may know now, last year, just at the end of last year, federal law changed. Medical bills do not count towards credit score or credit debt. So if you don't pay your medical bills, although you're in collections, I don't want to say you're disincentivized. That makes it sound like people are going to be dishonest intentionally. But if you have, well, yeah, I mean, if you have bills you need to pay because you got behind for whatever reason, your medical bills are the last bills you're going to pay because they're not impacting your credit score. So we have that. That's
So
sort
that aspect is also trended downward, I think.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Did you say that just took effect this January 1?
It's federal legislation, yeah. It was sometime, I forget when it was in December, but it went into effect in December.
So we won't know.
We won't know, but
We assume.
Our recovery rates, once it goes to collections, have always been below 30%.
Elon.
What's that?
Nothing.
Oh, okay.
quick conversation about the transfers, just because I know part of it will come up. This has been the number of transfers. So transfers are broken into sort of two categories. Acute transfers, those are the people that are going to another hospital for definitive care. That could either be for surgery or something that isn't offered in Monadnock Community Hospital, or they just need a longer hospital stay that Monadnock can provide. So that's the trend for patients, again, over, that ends in 23 because that's when we enter the transfer program. The other bulk of, well, we called them transfers, but from the hospital's perspective, they're discharges. So a lot of people we would bring back to Pheasantwood, Rivermead, other nursing care facilities that are in the area, or, and patients like that. Just a little, again, showing us an example about the transfers. Again, this is 15 through 23. In looking at this, you can see, we sort of went up, but that general trend line is the same. Just, again, it's the same people providing insurance. So you have that same trend line decreasing as you're going down for that. So really, for the ambulance services, any place you're looking to get revenue from, that revenue is decreasing and going down. Would you like to step in here, Doc?
I suppose.
Here, I'll give you the clicker. I'll just sit down. You can stay right there if you want.
That's fine. It's all good. Hi, everyone. So if you don't know me, haven't met me, John Fahey, Deputy Chief VMS for Peterborough. So part of this we thought was pretty important was going through just generally how the structure of an ambulance bill works. Not something most people know, and quite frankly, it's always good to get a little bit of a refresher. So for whatever reason, we come to somebody's house, we pick them up, we transport them to the hospital. Obviously, there's associated paperwork with that. It's the bane of all of our existence. So we complete our paperwork. Those get reviewed and cleared to go to billing. So we send them over to our billing company, EMAX. And they do a cursory review for anything that could inhibit the billing process, missing insurance information, any kind of missing patient acknowledgement, consent signatures, stuff like that. They also take a brief look at it to see if the trip was medically necessary. That comes up in a minute. At that point, they do all the math for us, they compile the bill, and it is made up of two parts. The base rate, which are those big numbers in the hundreds of dollars that we talked about earlier, broken out by service level, and then there's mileage. Mileage is flat no matter what level of service is provided, but obviously it goes up because we bill per mile. I will summarize this so not everybody has to read all of it, but
this will be on the website so you can go back and review.
So your base rates are coded by the level of service. So you have non-emergency rates. Those were typically the transfers, actually the discharge style transfers that we were talking about. And then you have your emergency rates. Emergency rates are a little higher. There's a little more implied in the way of care and assessment there. BLS non-emergency is the lowest rate that's out there. There's a table at the end of the presentation if you want to look at it. But then it goes to BLS, ALS1, which is anything that's invasive performed by an AEMT or paramedic, but doesn't necessarily get to the complexity of ALS2 or specialty care. Specialty care is a transfer, interfacility transfer billing rate only. It has to do with when you provide interventions or medications that are beyond the scope of your traditional paramedic. So that could be things like blood, antibiotics, any medication that's not normally something we would administer in the field. So following their determination of the base rate, you know, they multiply the agency's mileage rate by the number of loaded miles. Unfortunately, we can't bill for the miles that we don't have a patient in the truck. After that, it gets sent to the first responsible party. Generally, it's their primary insurance, whether that's for 65% of our patients, Medicare or Medicaid, or private insurers, etc. If there is no insurance information at the time of service, the bill's sent to the patient. Many times they get things squared away with EMAX and the bill gets to where it needs to go. The insurance companies then, like any other medical claim, going to open the claim and do a review. They review it for medical necessity. Did this patient require an ambulance? If it's determined to be medically necessary and therefore in line with their policy, a covered service, the bill's paid up to what that insurer has deemed to be an allowed amount. That we have no standing on what they decide an allowed amount is. Payment to the allowed amount also doesn't factor into anything that, per their plan, is deemed the patient's responsibility. So like Chief mentioned, any kind of deductible, any kind of co-pays, co-insurance, anything of that nature, the patient's still on the hook for all of that unless they've reached their out-of-pocket maximum.
John, how common is it for the insurance company to say it wasn't medically necessary or didn't need an ambulance?
So for Medicare, they're the ones that care a lot more than some of the commercial insurers because their definition of medically necessary is different, and we'll get into that in a bit. If the trip is determined to be non-medically necessary, the bill goes directly to the patient.
But how common is that?
It was a lot more common when we were doing those non-emergent discharges. It's not as common anymore. I would struggle to put a number on it because our data that we get back isn't broken out that way. So I don't have a great answer for you on that one, I'm sorry. But if the remainder of that bill isn't covered based on the allowed amount, unless it's a Medicaid patient, a Medicare patient, or a VA patient, the patient is going to receive a bill for the remainder of that balance. If we don't do that, then we can't do it anywhere. So our billing practices have to be consistent. Like we kind of talked about, the difference with Medicare and Medicaid, individuals who are over 65, medically disabled, unable to work, have demonstrated significant financial hardship. All of these people are eligible for these specialty programs through the federal government, and Medicaid is administered by the state as well. The challenge is we can't balance bill these patients, and their reimbursement rates are significantly lower than the billed rate of almost any ambulance service out there. They often only reimburse 30 to 50% of the given service level. Medicare and Medicaid also have reduced payments for mileage. They pay about 50% of our mileage rate for the first 17 miles. And the only reason they do that is because of basically a rural add-on that they're not sure how much longer is going to continue. After that first 17 miles, that mileage rate drops even lower. And then it's billed at about 30%. So medically necessary. Essentially, we don't have the ability to say no. So whether we determine something is medically necessary is somewhat irrelevant. Statutorily, if somebody says they want to go to the hospital in an ambulance, we say, okay, no problem, we are happy to take you. At the time the service was, as the big long slide, most insurers will go with, if a reasonable human could have determined this to be an emergency, it will be a covered service if their plan covers ambulance services. For CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, it's a lot more strict. Medical necessity is established when the patient's condition is such that any case in which some means of transportation other than an ambulance could have been used without endangering the patient's health, whether or not such transportation is actually available, no payment may be made for ambulance services.
That's the federal government, just to make it clear.
So if you have a broken leg and you have Medicare, they will not pay if theoretically another person could have driven you. It's crazy.
Lay in the back seat.
Yep. So what happens when they decide it's not medically necessary? The patient should receive a denial letter from their insurance and they will be responsible for the billed amount. There is an appeals process. The town of Peterborough nor EMAX can initiate that appeals process for them. That's something the patients have to do on their own. In the case of Medicare or Medicaid, those are often directly billed to the patient in full. It's not considered balance billing because they received a non-covered service. Therefore, they're responsible for the billed amount. The Federal No Surprises Act, if any of you have heard of that, it's primarily geared towards helicopters and air ambulances. They did prohibit balance billing for those services. It does not cover ground services because federally the rates are still too contentious. There was a lot of outcry saying that the Medicare rates were not sufficient to sustain ambulance service. But that same element of medically necessary does hold true to the $40,000 helicopter bills as well. If you get an air ambulance bill for $40,000 because the insurance company decided it was not medically necessary, that is not balance billing. That is just the bill that somebody is forced to pay. So one of the things that we've kind of referred to, but we haven't really talked about, are insurance adjustments. This is the portion of that billed amount. So, I mean, if you referenced the slide a few minutes ago, I believe one of the years in recent history was $1.6 million. Of that $1.6 million, whatever portion that was billed to Medicare or Medicaid, and they reimbursed us, the remainder of that bill is adjusted. That's the fancy term for we have to write it off. It's a contractual obligation to receive Medicare payments. The other ways that we have some adjustments that factor into that missing revenue piece is the financial hardships that the chief talked about. Eventually, things that are sent to collections have to come off the books. Otherwise, we would be owed an astronomical amount of money. So things that go to collections do eventually fall off, and a lot of times anything that's billed to a patient who has passed away, those bills will eventually come off as well. If the estate doesn't pay it in a reasonable time frame, those just get adjusted away.
How do you judge financial hardship?
That's through the hospital's hardship plan that they have established. So they work with the patients that essentially the patient will reach out to either us, we will refer them to EMAX, and EMAX works with the hospital to get all that paperwork done. If they meet the criteria as established by Monadnock, then we will issue them a grant and waive their bill.
It's very rare. We found when we set all this up to have a patient that required a hardship grant from us for an ambulance that didn't already have it through the hospital for the hospital portion of the bill. So because the hospital program is actually part of a larger New Hampshire-wide hospital program, it made a lot of sense to just accept that program and whatever determination was made, usually at MCH, but it could be any other hospital, and just copy that. That way we're not repeating work.
I'm also wondering, John, how you determine the bill in the first place? Is this the cost to you, or is there something else involved?
The billed rates.
Yeah,
So those are generally derived from somewhat of an industry standard. I don't have the sheet with us, but our rates are very comparable to other services in New Hampshire. And then they are adjusted by the Board of Selectmen. I think we missed last year, but other than that, Medicare puts out an ambulance inflation factor annually, and we try to adjust them by at least that amount to maximize what we're hopefully capturing from Medicare. So to put some of these things into practice, if we respond to a patient's residence, patient's complaining of chest pain. Chest pain is typically an ALS complaint, so if we have an ALS provider, either an AEMT or a paramedic, those are who we are going to send. EMS providers are going to show up. They're typically going to take vital signs, perform an EKG, interpret said EKG, determine whether somebody's having a heart attack, give either aspirin, nitroglycerin, start an IV, and then depending on the patient's condition, they're going to be brought to the most appropriate hospital or the patient's desired hospital if it's sufficient. Typically, they'll also draw blood. That's just something that we happen to do. Not all facilities accept it, but that's not particularly relevant to the conversation. So this particular patient, we'll say they were transported to Monadnock with a transport distance of 5 miles. So the breakdown for this bill would be ALS 1, $1,485.85, and then our mileage, $25.48 times 5 patient loaded miles, brings us to a total of $1,013.25, $1,613.25. How that changes, if that patient has no insurance, they are going to receive the bill directly, and we are eligible to receive $1,613.25. If the patient has commercial insurance, which is anything that is purchased through either the marketplace, it's not something that is provided through a private entity that isn't Medicare, isn't Medicaid, any kind of employer group insurance, that sort of thing, that insurance is going to be billed that same $1,613.25, and we will receive that insurer's allowed amount. They are not all the same. Anthem could choose to pay a different amount based on Plan A, Plan B, Plan C, whatever it happens to be. Same for Harvard Pilgrim, Blue Cross Blue Shield, all of them. That allowed amount will not include anything that is determined to be the patient's responsibility, deductibles, co-insurance, etc. Insurers don't publish these amounts. They are trending lower and lower over time. Anthem is the biggest insurer in the state, and my understanding is that their average reimbursement rate is now less than Medicare for covered services, for ambulance transports. Any balance left on that is being billed to the patient because it's commercial insurance. If the patient has Medicare, Medicare is also going to be billed that same $1,613.25. We are just going to get the reimbursement, which is $613 that they are saying they will pay. The rest of it goes away. It's adjusted out because we are not allowed to pursue that bill any further. If it's Medicaid, the same scenario applies, slightly lower amounts. We're relatively fortunate. A couple of years ago, due to falling reimbursements, the state of New Hampshire decided that Medicaid amounts, which are state-driven, should be adjusted to, I forget the exact percentage, but very close to Medicare rates. So at that point, we would receive $571.13 on that same $1,613 bill.
John? Oh. In the average case for both Medicare and Medicaid, what is the approximate time from the time of the incident to the time you receive that payment?
That is a great question. It depends on the time of year. In all seriousness, if the government is talking about government shutdowns, that drives bills out for months potentially, depending on the backlog. Unfortunately, Medicare and Medicaid, they kind of pay when they want to. There are times that we will receive reimbursement over a year after the date of service. It's a very strange billing model.
What's the best case scenario?
I would say optimistically 3 to 4 months.
When United Healthcare had their breach last year, we went through a 3-month period with almost zero revenue. And it was scary because we were still operating out of our revolving fund. But yeah, we went through.
Very close to zero.
We came very close to zero because CMS was not processing any claims at all. And there were a number of private insurers that also used United Health as their clearinghouse. So we went through a period of time where we had about an 80%, 80% of what we were expecting in revenue was delayed due to this. We ended up getting all of it, but it took quite a long time to get it.
John, you distinguished between people who have private insurance, that you don't send it directly to them, you send it to the private insurance company. What if you have supplemental and Medicare? It doesn't do the supplemental insurance company, it's just written off?
No, so I apologize. Given the complexity of some of this, I didn't get into too much in the way of secondary and tertiary payers. Yes, if there are other options, they will trickle down into those secondary payers. For Medicaid, Medicaid has to be the payer of last resort, period. That's, so
Supplemental.
there really is not supplemental for Medicaid.
Leslie?
So Lily, John mentioned write-offs, but they're not really write-offs, right? Because that would imply that we somehow could use that. Like if I was a business and I wrote off my losses.
Correct.
So it's not, we don't get any.
No,
I wouldn't call it a benefit because obviously we're not getting money.
Well, we don't pay taxes.
Right, I know, but that's what I'm saying. There's no other thing, no other mechanism that happens because of those losses. We just take that loss.
It's recorded on our audit so that there's an understanding of what has been billed but has not been collected. But because the billing is not processed through the finance department here, we use the EMAC service for that. So they are maintaining those records. It is an audit documentation of dollars, but it never hits our accounting system.
And most of your insurance, your private insurance companies are for-profit businesses, and it behoves their stockholders not to pay out any more money than they have to.
What's the cost of the EMAX service?
Their percentage.
7%.
7%?
Of
We got 10 minutes.
what bills or received?
It's a bill?
Oh, no, billed received, it's
Yeah,
received.
received.
I
I was gonna
We
say it's not
actually
billed.
just got a bill the other day, I can pull that up, and
No subscription.
No.
So
No.
their business is also hurting
just take
because
it
our
down.
revenues have gone down.
Yeah.
The amount that we are paying them now is significantly less than what we were paying them 2 years ago.
So in this example, they're billing us at 7% of the 1613? Is that what we're saying?
Yes.
of the collect.
Yeah, the collected amount,
Collected amount.
1613, in the case of Medicare.
613, not
7%.
1613.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Right, but, okay, so in the case of Medicare, $613, they're billing us 7% of that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So the best we do is 93% of what's.
Al, did you have a question?
These
That was-
outstanding collections considered a liability for the town? By way of the auditors, where they commit to?
Presumably you abandon them at some point.
So you don't have to reserve for these in any way?
We don't have to reserve
No.
them.
No, we
so
don't
No,
reserve them,
that's
correct.
not,
It's just.
I'm not sure how they consider it. I've not asked them that question.
Was it held as EMAX as a receivable before it gets out?
I think because it doesn't actually get to us. Yeah, it's not considered a liability, it's on a liability account.
And we are
That
not
on our
holding
books.
monies in anticipation of this being
Right.
paid at a different moment.
We don't have stockholders, so.
Right, exactly, yeah.
How much more time are we going to be spending there?
Not much. We have like 5 slides left, 6 slides left after John finishes.
So this is the chart. Again, it's all in the packet. It's going to be up in the PDF, but it does highlight what our current rates are versus Medicaid, Medicare, and then I broke out the amount we have to adjust just in base rate for all of those levels of service. So a couple other things that have been talked about.
Keep going.
I figured I'd give you a break.
Here for more support.
So this is not a Peterborough problem. This is a widespread national problem. You can look in many different journals that'll tell you that ambulance services are closing, and a lot of the rural ones are. It's very difficult to make money in the rural environment. But multiple neighboring states, Maine, New York, and Vermont, have actually done very in-depth studies on it. All three have highlighted significant disparities in the needs of their EMS systems versus how they're going to be funded. Vermont and Maine both elected to inject a ton of money, millions and millions of dollars, to offset the immediate problem while they continue to study it. Your thoughts on the state of New Hampshire doing this are going to be what they are. New York chose to establish 4 subcommittees to further study the issue. They did not allocate any funds for it. So the other question is
Should I just,
go ahead.
legislatively, last year, during budget, we talked about them possibly not even allowing us to balance bill.
Correct.
Where are we with that?
So that's good.
New Hampshire's going in the opposite.
So there are 3 current bills before the state legislature, 2 in the House, 1 in the Senate. One House bill is sort of fallen by the wayside. Tomorrow I am testifying in favor, on behalf of the Fire Chiefs Association, along with the New Hampshire Ambulance Association, for House Bill 725, which would set the state rate for New Hampshire commercial insurers at 325% of the Medicaid rate. And that is equivalent to what several other states in the country have done and pretty close to the other New England states that have picked it. That would also then prohibit balance billing of just those commercial people. Quite frankly, that rate's higher than our base rate, so we're in pretty good shape. The one thing, although that doesn't, in New Hampshire commercial insured patients are about 10 to 12% of our patients annually. The one thing that does do, even though it doesn't apply to all of our patients, is for those private insurers, when their ambulance company says your rate is ridiculous, it gives us the ability to say, well, actually, the New Hampshire legislature has established that a fair and equitable rate is 325% of Medicaid. There's a Senate bill out there. The Senate bill is a little more problematic because that language actually in it prohibits any New Hampshire licensed ground ambulance from balance billing. So regardless of what that, what the company is, what the insurer is, it prohibits the ambulance service from the balance billing. So currently those are the 2 bills that are most in play. And Fire Chiefs Association, we don't know if the Senate one will go away if the House one passes, because the majority of the House bill is focused, and Senate bill are focused on a capped rate for New Hampshire commercial insurance. That's what the insurance industry is really interested in, is creating that, the cap and sort of, setting the ground rules for that. So we don't know if the House bill makes it into the Senate, if the Senate will do away with their own bill, we really have no idea. But that's the one significant difference, is the Senate bill prohibits the licensed ambulance from sending that balance bill, as opposed to prohibiting you from balance billing anybody who has New Hampshire commercial insurance.
So what's the bottom line as far as anticipated revenue?
If we lose the ability to balance bill all of our patients, it's about 25% of our revenue.
Take a hit.
Yes, 25% of our revenue. That's based on numbers that Dennis has given us from an average over the last few years.
All right.
So, to just take a quick look at what some of the other municipalities do, Chief and I reached out to a whole lot of people through the New Hampshire Chiefs Association. I touched base with the town of Milford's ambulance service and met with Eric Shelberg, their director, and had some pretty in-depth conversations. All of them in some fashion rely on taxpayer funding. Even when you have private ambulance services engaging in 911 activities such as AMR in Manchester, Stewart's up in the Lakes region, all of those people, all of those entities receive taxpayer funding in some fashion. Of the other municipal ambulance services in the state that will do transfers subject to their availability, all of them treat them as the absolute last resort to assist the hospital and that patient. None of them try to engage in it as a primary means of their activity, because it does impact the 911 service.
John, is it fair to say that the service that they're getting in Peterborough is better than most other communities?
I will say 100%, I won't put you on the spot.
Sure.
The exception may be Milford.
I mean, my point is that
Yeah.
everybody is having taxpayer support, and we are as well.
Yeah.
But in addition, we are getting, I think, better services.
Yes.
Because we have more, better trained people and equipment.
We have more robust capacity.
So it had come up in various avenues that we are somewhat similar to Milford, so I figured I'd just do a little bit into their budget and ours and kind of some quick comparisons between the two. We serve 13,214 people. Milford serves 16,400. We have a much larger service area by square mileage, 163 to 200, or 225, sorry, decimals are hard today. Our call volume's a little less. They are a little more densely populated, obviously. They have a little bit more in the way of almost like a daytime population, a little more industry, but we're also significantly more rural. So we're further away from everything. We provided 139 mutual aid calls last year. They provided 67, but they received 80. They have multiple other services around that have the capacity to backfill them when their ambulances are out. The services around here do not staff the same way that we do. They are all on call at night. So, I mean, Antrim is on call all the time. So the capacity for that mutual aid is not as robust here as it is in Milford. Staffing configuration, because we're rural, because we don't have that level of mutual aid, we go for 2 ambulances 24/7. Milford does 1 ambulance 24/7 and 1 ambulance for 16 hours from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. Ideal staffing for them is going to be 1 paramedic and 3 AEMTs. That gives them 29,200 staffed hours to our 35,040 staffed hours. They also have 11 full-time EMS providers with 1 full-time director versus our 7 full-time EMS providers with 1 full-time deputy chief.
John, for our population served 13,214, are there any other alternatives for those people, or are we providing 100% of the services to that group of people?
We are providing 100% of the transport services. So obviously we have 6,500 people here in Peterborough, give or take a few. The remainder of that population is in our contract towns. Each of those contract towns operates a non-transport rescue. They're not licensed to provide transports, with the exception of Francistown. None of their vehicles are equipped to be able to transport. So doing the transports themselves isn't an option. We do get the occasional mutual aid from Antrim or Jaffrey Ambulance and stuff, so I guess, in that sense, they have that option, but we really do provide almost 100% of the transport services for the region that we serve.
Yeah, I have a question on the budget there, because there's one line item that says ambulance 911 service fees, and there's a separate item that says other towns' cost of service. Is that other towns' cost of service the trip by trip, or they pay some negotiated fee?
So the
Where are
other,
you, sorry, where are you?
On the revenue road here?
On the revenue, yes.
Oh,
That's the amount that we bill to the other towns using the blended formula. I think you have
So
a
that's a fixed
synopsis
amount?
of that. No, it varies year to year based on.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not dependent upon how much service there actually is.
yes,
Yes,
it is.
It is. It's partially dependent. It's 50% based on their population and 50% based on their calls for service in that community.
But it jumped up in the current budget very significantly.
That's reflective of the change in funding last year. So we build the other communities based on a one-year look back as opposed to a forward-looking budget. So they're being billed now this year. That jump is reflective of the move from the revolving fund to the actual general fund.
Have the towns accepted those numbers, or is that still?
They did. You know, there were.
It wasn't easy
They
with a
weren't
couple of them.
excited about it, obviously, but, and they had good questions, so we were able to respond to those, and they've accepted at least for this coming year at any rate.
So the part that you folks care about, the budget numbers. So with the
We'll get
except,
you in a minute.
oh,
Hey, you had a question, Jay? Or you
No,
wanna-
I'll wait.
so with the exception of the fire station bond, right now, we don't have any debt service for the ambulance service. Milford does all of their things by leasing capital equipment, so their ambulances are leased, their cardiac monitors are leased, the whole nine. Our total budget, 2 million, as it says up there, 2,289,447. Their overall budget is just shy of $2 million. They received a little bit more in the way of patient billing revenue. They transported a little more in the way of patients. So we are still relatively competitive there. They do not have any contract revenue, which for this slide is that other towns' 911 cost of service. So our contract revenue equated to $518,000 in this current budget. So anticipated revenues significantly different because we can capture that money from the other communities. So the overall tax burden actually puts us cheaper than the town of Milford. No problem.
It's cheaper, but on a per capita basis, it's much cheaper.
Yeah. Yes.
So, last two slides, promise. Service considerations. So, we have a very stable service delivery model. We are very fortunate, as I said before, that the select board and the voters have supported us in a model that is working. It is, quite frankly, one that some other towns would like to get to, but because we have the model we have, we were able to better adapt to the changes that came a few years ago. That stiff increase in our mutual aid over the last few years, as you know, we were dropping down to 1 ambulance, a lot of those services were dropping down to 0 ambulances. So we were still able to provide that base level of service. As John mentioned, ambulance services are closing, and our priority really is to ensure that the 6,500 residents in Peterborough and the almost 14,000 on the large area that we have always have an ambulance available to them. The next slide that I want to show, I think it's the next one. Let me just make sure here. Yep, there's two. The next thing I want to do is sort of some perspectives for, and not trying to pit department against department, we're looking at here, but just a little perspective across the community. It was really kind of interesting, if you look at the police, DPW, ambulance, and fire, sort of the 4 budgets that I would consider to be public safety related in the community. Every department has a budget that's supported by the taxpayers. Every department brings some revenue in, which gives you a net cost. You look at your gross cost per resident and how that comes out. For your police department, your DPW, and your fire department, your residents are paying, if you will, 90 cents on the budgeted dollar. For your ambulance service, they're paying 41. So if you look at the gross budgeted amount minus the revenues for the residents, so you as a resident, whether it's your fire department, your police department, or your DPW, are paying more than twice as much than you are for your ambulance service. The other thing, and Al said, how do the other towns take it? And looked at it. It was not an easy discussion, but the other towns are critical for us. And the reason the other towns are critical, and we have to continue to have a model that ensures our service is the preferred service for those communities, is, going back to that blended formula, this is the percentage of the calls for those that those other towns have. So almost 40% of those calls are the other towns. The total revenue, when you look at the service charge, which is that money that we bill out to them, and you look at that revenue based on a per call basis, we are generating almost $700,000 a year by providing service to those other towns. So as hard as it is for our own taxpayers to look at this from that perspective and, why are we doing something for others, why are we doing something for others, we really wouldn't be it would be very difficult to create an operating model, and we did meet with the select board and have a larger discussion about this. It would be very difficult to create an operating model that would provide substantial savings that would not cause us to immediately lose the capacity for all of this revenue. Because we really, if we were to drop down a truck, for example, we would be shedding the ability to bring in that $671,000. One of the things that was in the Vermont study, which I think is interesting, Vermont currently has approximately one ambulance for every 6,500, one emergency ambulance for every 6,500 residents. That number has been steadily decreasing over the last 10 years. They're in a panic because they figure that when that number gets a little bit lower, it's going to mean that it's going to be seriously impact their ability to deliver service. So if you look at our model with our two ambulances and our residents, we're sitting right about that number too. So we're comfortable, and we're comfortable with that. I think part of it too is we're not also figuring in a Burlington and a Montpelier and Stowe and these other super robust and high volume communities, but we're there, so we are sort of right at that edge. And now we're done. Other than discussion about the budget specifically, I mean, if you look, our overall ambulance budget is down by 1.6%, ballparkish. We're anticipating an increase in our revenues by about 8%, just over, almost 9%, 8.8, I think.
Which is all driven again by the other towns.
Again, by the other towns doing that. If you look at the significant increases, we were able to decrease in a couple of our salary line items. One increase that might stand out is under training is tuition reimbursement line. So the town in its employee manual provides for tuition reimbursement for employees if it is budgeted and moving forward. So we're including money next year to help with some tuition reimbursement for a couple of our folks. And really the rest of the change, I mean, the overall budget is down. And we are trying the decrease. There's a pretty significant decrease in the salaries budget, and we're doing that through last year that the money that you're seeing for this year reflected are still looking to onboard a whole bunch of new people in our onboarding process. We're looking at anywhere from 60 to 90 hours of pure orientation time, and then individuals will third ride, so it's essentially an extra body for 12 hours a day for another 100 hours or so, usually, to get that in there. Again, the second time I've had to do this tonight. We've got a good, solid, stable core group of people right now. I mean, 6 months that could change, but right now we have that group. We've just onboarded one new full-time medic. We've got another per diem medic who's going through the orientation process now. We've got a good complement of basic EMTs and advanced EMTs. We have one of our basics who's going to advanced school. We have one of our advanced EMTs who wants to go to paramedic school. So I think we're positioned very well for where we are. The one other thing that I will say, we had for the taxpayer responsibility for the ambulance service, it was a huge jump. I mean, it literally went from $4-something to almost $900,000 in 1 year. We now have reached the point where that piece is stable based on current assumptions. Balanced billing goes away. Some other drastic change comes along that we can't predict, but based on our current set of assumptions, we have reached that stable point. We are looking at those small changes, those small increased costs to the taxpayers that really are similar to what every other department comes across in terms of increased energy costs, increased costs for COLA, merit raises, and that sort of stuff.
You're saying that stable point is around 450,000?
No, right now, no, our budget now is
900,000?
is stabilized, yeah, right now is stabilized with that. What did I have? Well, what did I have here? This year, currently, we are looking at ambulance 919, so I'll call it 920,000 is roughly what we're looking at as that net cost for the Peterborough residents.
Go ahead, Jay.
Oh, yeah, I was just wondering about retirement, how this town handles that. Are any of the other towns responsible for any of the retirement money?
They are, we bill it out. So that's part of the cost that we bill out to the other towns. If we don't recoup it through what we collect in service fees, so when we bill patients or their insurance companies, we bill out to the other communities based on what we need to raise and appropriate. They get a
But what
equal
about in the
share.
future when, if they leave, we're still gonna be, their retirement, we're still gonna be responsible for it?
So, because the folks that we do have in retirement are part of the New Hampshire pension system, we're not going to be responsible for that. They're contributing into it. New Hampshire pension system is ultimately responsible for them.
But we do owe $8 million plus in retirement benefits, the town of Peterborough.
I'm sorry?
Don't we owe a bunch of money to the retirement system?
No, we don't know
No?
anything. No.
We have the town portion of contribution for every single employee is charged with every weekly payroll. So ambulance employees are, the retirement town contribution is 13.53% of what they make. And that is charged to the town every week we pay them. And that's only for full-time employees. Social Security is what is used for part-time employees. Whereas fire and police contribution rates are 30 and 31% of their earnings every single week. We do not have a back owed amount to the New Hampshire retirement system. We pay them every single month based off of the weekly payroll that we run.
Chief, does your overtime allow you to not have to hire some additional employees, or is it
Yes.
just straight, pure
Nope.
overtime?
No, so actually, that's a very good point. Our full-time employees all work a 48-hour work week. So of our full-time employees, they have automatically built in 8 hours of overtime, if you will. So if you look across our 7 full-time people times that 8 hours a week that they work, we actually are getting an extra employee at, that hour and a half, at that time and a half rate. But again, what's our average cost annually per full-time employee for benefits? 80, 60?
Oh, for benefits?
Yeah.
The family plan health insurance is over $30,000.
Yeah, and then you'd add in what we'd be paying for our retirement contribution to that and the rest of that. So yeah, that is part of it, does sort of offset maybe or absorb some of those costs of additional full-time staff. So it isn't all just going above or all extra people working, correct?
I was under the impression that you guys, working with administration, were going to be working on a few different models potentially. Did you have discussions over the last couple of months? Or is basically you did that and you decided this is the best way to go?
So we made a presentation to the select board that presented a number of different options, and the selectmen decided to move forward with the budget as we have already presented it.
And my second question would be, you mentioned, obviously, if all the towns went away, we'd lose $700,000 in revenue. Did you balance what the expenses or the savings would be by doing that?
There would not be a proportionate amount of savings, even if we were to go down to, say, a single ambulance. When you look at the single ambulance, yeah, so short-term costs, obviously, if we were down to a single ambulance, we're either transitioning to 100% full-time staff, or we're getting rid of full-time staff, so either through attrition or layoff, which would have an associated cost. The other thing with that is, so I guess the number is, if you were to drop down, we had that 35,000 hours, say we were to drop down to 17,000 hours of staffed hours, we would still have to have people on call and bringing people back in for those second calls and for coverage for people that are, going to Southern, going to wherever else. So we estimated, I don't have the number in front of me, I don't know if you remember, but we were looking at it not being a savings, at almost.
It almost washed.
Yeah, almost a wash with what we would lose in terms of the ability to capture the revenue from the other towns and what we would save. I think it was within a couple $100,000 of cost difference to run the current model we have, providing service to all those towns versus just dropping back to Peterborough and a single ambulance.
Which was effectively the saving, most of that savings, I think, was in the capital.
Yeah.
It was essentially being able to push out the capital program by not having to buy quite so many ambulances so frequently.
And also,
How often do we get
It would
multiple
mean-
calls at the same time?
Oh, yeah.
less quality of service.
Yeah, if you, I think that, you know, what was really telling for me when we were reviewing that as a potential option was looking at the chart that John put together showing the calls per time a day. And what really stood out was the number of times that we would potentially be missing a second call for service, and who knows what that second call for service would be. So that's a very dramatic drop in the quality of service that we're providing to our residents that they obviously are relying upon.
So is there any kind of contingency plan? I mean, it's for next year, obviously, but, you know, given that you had to really, sounds like, press the towns to accept the new rate, what the chances are of some or all of them dropping?
So I wouldn't say it was press.
No.
I think they felt the same shock that we did, because we, meaning Peterborough taxpayers. One of the things the transfer service did was the transfer service allowed us, if you remember back, we sort of had the two budgets, and we would allocate based on call volume expenses. So I think, I know we met with 3 of the towns personally, and then had phone conversations and emails back and forth, either at Nicole's level or my level with fire chief to fire chief. Those other towns, sort of getting them to understand that shift in how everything now is falling upon the taxpayers. The short answer is all of the towns that we service truly value the service that we bring. A couple of them, actually, one of them has had another service as recently as a few years ago and made a decision to come with us. The ones that have us, and I'm paraphrasing, and I know you spoke to Francistown, but it's sort of, we understand what it is, it's difficult, but we also understand why it's what it is. And there is an appreciation for the level of service. And the proximity is a big, big piece of it. You know, not to tell war stories. The chart John had with the comparison to Milford and Peterborough showed about 15 times we use mutual aid. I think what's important to understand for those 15 times is none of those 15 times was it a first or a second call. In fact, for at least 8 of them that we were able to identify, it was when we needed a 4th or a 5th ambulance because we were that deep. And, you know, one just recently, a month or so, in December, beginning of December, we had a motor vehicle accident in Dublin that required 4 ambulances. We had 2 of our ambulances in Dublin, one of them at a call at Summer Street, and then 2 mutual aid ambulances coming in. So, you know, we not again, 3rd time tonight. We are doing a really good job of meeting those needs, and I think that the 5 communities that we serve truly appreciate our, and I don't mean our by the department, I mean our community's collective desire to keep that service the robust service that it is.
I think, Leslie, that part of the answer to your question was, where are they going to go? And as Chief points out, we have the physical proximity to this set of towns, so we have a big advantage in that. But the other part is, as Nicole described it, the way we set the price on the town has to do with what it actually cost the previous year. So they don't have the sense we're making up some ambitious number. This is what it cost. So the only question really for them is do they want the service?
The quality of service. So just going back to my earlier question, when you presented to the select board, was that like a public meeting, or what was the forum that happened?
I'm sorry. Yeah, they had a workshop.
Is any of that information publicly available, or that was?
minutes.
There's non-public minutes because of the type of conversation that we were having
So,
throughout the meeting.
The session was a non-public session. The vast majority of it was everything that is in your presentation now. There were some other nuanced things that Nicole felt was important to have in the non-public, but every single slide you saw tonight was what they saw. Everything was all part of that and that the decision-making process.
In that brainstorming, all those sessions, was the possibility of, because of your large geographic territory, of having a satellite arrangement where we had some satellites around us that we actually can either help set up or created, so that they in fact would send people to us if we got short? In other words, a different structure.
So it's interesting you say that. Cheshire County EMS, so several years ago, Cheshire County did it, and that's one of the models they have, and they've worked with several of the smaller communities. Fitzwilliam is one, Winchester is another, to provide like that second provider when the provider isn't available to do that. Again, anecdotally, from what I've heard, it isn't a perfect model because those people coming in aren't necessarily familiar with the specific equipment, aren't familiar with the geographic area and looking at that. That being said, we have used providers from those other rescues to assist us on scene. A good example, again, I'm a basic EMT. If we need an AEMT to call in Hancock, they have several AEMTs that will initiate that care at that level. They will have to ride with us because I can't manage that patient once they've started that level of care. So we already do some of that, some of the provider sharing, particularly around patient care and skill level with our 5 communities. Is that what you're?
That is, yeah, or it's a little more intentional, that you just, you intended to do that.
One of the abilities we have now by having sort of everybody here is, John's in the station 5 days a week as a paramedic. I'm usually in the station. It provides us with some flexibility. So if everybody is in there, especially if it's a day where we have a single paramedic truck, and the other truck's out, if we get a call that clearly is not a paramedic level call, quite often I'll take that call, and that'll allow the paramedic to stay back there to be available in our fly car, or if a third provider comes in, to ensure that we have that, more likely to have that paramedic available when we have that ALS level call. So we have a lot of more flexibility by having everybody in one place.
I think also to add into that, you have to also factor in the additional cost of having the infrastructure. So there's, those fixed building costs. And also, if you look at the call volume, like we said much earlier in the presentation, and I know we threw a lot at you, so you might not have caught it, but 60% of the calls that are generated within Peterborough itself. The other 40% are distributed widely across the rest of the service area, so it would be difficult to pick a satellite area that would actually make sense that isn't really close to Peterborough anyways.
That's that distribution of where those, so they're, with the exception of Sharon, relatively equally distributed across those communities. And again, population of 500 and...
It seems that Francistown is like the furthest out.
Yeah.
In terms of equipment, I think I noticed in one of John's slides, the Milford comparison, they're leasing their ambulance equipment. Has that been considered here versus purchasing?
The town used to lease, I know that, and I'll give kudos to Lily.
I'm against it.
No, that's the whole purpose of the capital, that's the whole purpose of the capital reserve funds, is to get away from that leasing and those lease costs, and doing that. And, we're fortunate, I think, as a community, we have the capital reserve. The ambulance is a little bit behind the curve, only because during those last couple of years that we were in the revolving fund, we were not able to put any money towards capital because as it was depleting faster than we needed it to deplete. So we're playing a little bit of catch up. This year's capital request includes enough money that will get us to the point in the ambulance service capital reserve fund that we will have the money to buy the ambulance that is ordered should that ambulance miraculously show up, because we still don't know when that ambulance is going to be delivered.
Chief, just one more quick one.
Yeah.
3 deputy chiefs or 2? Is Brian still?
So Brian's a call deputy. So we have Brian, John and Brad are full-time. Brad's paid entirely out of the fire department budget. John is paid entirely out of the EMS budget. They're in full-time positions. The position that Brian Wall has is a call deputy. Brian's been a deputy, well, he's been on the department for almost 15 years, 18, something like that, since, whatever. But he and Brad were both deputy chiefs when we had the 2 call deputy positions. And then in 2023, we converted one of those positions from a call position to a full-time position, and that's the position that Brad has. Yeah.
That's all my questions. Anybody else? Comments,
I got a
concerns?
couple.
David?
I'd like somebody to help me understand how it is that we dropped a large service, which you said took a lot of manpower and equipment power. We dropped that service and our costs went up. So how did that happen? From 2023 to 2025, say the last 2 fiscal years.
So the cost for the service as a whole, I'm gonna step over here so I can look at you. The cost as a whole did not increase.
It's not true.
What you're not seeing reflected there is prior to 2020, fiscal 24, roughly 40% of our budget was captured in a separate, our operating costs were captured in a separate budget.
Right, and I looked at that.
So if you sum the 2 of them together,
Which I did.
it's gone up that 2, 3, 4%. It was not a significant jump in the last few years.
Right, it keeps going up. So we dropped a significant service and costs kept going up. There was no change in costs. So you're saying like all these guys were working overtime?
Yes.
To do the service. Then we stopped doing the service. Did we stop? Where do you see it? We stopped paying them? Did I miss something?
We're not paying them overtime anymore.
So if you look at if you look at this year, if you look at our salaries budget for this year and last year, there is decreases there with that. So the overall, and do we have the transfers or anywhere? Do you have that, Lily?
Hey, I can, David, why don't you look at the column, the total column for FY '24, because those are actual expenditures, and then compare it to FY '21.
Right.
We spent 50,000 less in FY '24 than FY '21.
Right, and then we
The costs
spent,
are,
I
so
mean,
the
they go
last
up
2
and
columns
down.
are budgets, but the first 4 columns are actual expenditures. In FY '24, the ambulance department spent $1,814,300.
So you think that that's gonna continue then? That that's the reflection?
I'm saying that I disagree with your statement that it's gone up every year.
Okay.
It's actually gone
All
down.
right, I got you.
The last 2 columns are budgets, so we don't know, exactly how much will truly get spent until June 30th.
Right.
It is there, but we budget for what we expect people will work, what we anticipate being emergencies that need to be filled with call-ins versus
So the answer to my question is, I don't see it correctly, but we're still budgeting for the high number,
we have
but
to.
we don't think it'll be that.
Well, we can't.
That's what you're telling me.
Yeah, the problem is that we can't exceed the budget. We can spend up to the budget, so we need to make sure that we're there.
Okay, well, hopefully there'll be money left over. The other thing I was trying to understand was if I understood it right, we have 2 fully staffed ambulances 24 hours a day, but if I remember correctly in the capital budgeting, we're budgeting for 3 fully equipped ambulances.
Correct.
And why would that be?
So we actually have, our goal is to have 4 physical operating ambulances. 3 of them are fully equipped. And we have the 2 primary ambulances. The 3rd ambulance gives us the ability to respond to that 3rd call, which happens on a almost weekly basis, so 3 calls going on at the same time. Not only that, but it ensures that if one of the first 2 ambulances have a mechanical breakdown, which is very common since all of our ambulances are well over 200,000 miles now, we immediately have that ambulance to go in service as that 2nd ambulance. The 4th ambulance that we have is not fully equipped. It does not have everything in it. That is a mechanical spare for those long-term duration. We absolutely have to have 2 ambulances available 24/7. And on multiple occasions, we have to have 3 ambulances available to meet our service demands. To ensure that that happens, the 4th. Now, the thing to realize is, yes, we have those ambulances. The cost of those ambulance is the maintenance in what we lose in potential trade-in when we replace them. Because we're not buying 4 brand-new ambulances. We're buying our ambulances on our replacement cycle based on that and keeping the older ambulances. So really, the cost of that is the loss in trade-in at the time of purchase and the maintenance cost for having that. And we have always believed, as a community, that ensuring that service is available is worth that cost.
But that third ambulance is fully equipped, but not fully staffed.
Correct, it's not staffed. I mean,
Right.
today I went in it with an on-call EMTU came in for a third ambulance call.
I think we're in overtime, so.
I would like to thank you for your patience.
So you have quite an extensive presentation. Thank you for all the hard work that you gentlemen all did for that. Giving us much food for thought.
Thank you.
I entertain a motion maybe to adjourn.
Chief, we'll see this presentation again in deliberative session.
Only if you give it. It will be on the website, though. We'll get the PDF of the slides up, and the video will be up. Are we still recording?
Yes.
Okay, good. I have to say dolphin once just to keep Posh happy.
Second. All in favor? Adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
On a
I'm not going to say